Dear guests, good morning. I'm apologizing for speaking English, but my Greek is still not good enough. My name is Monika Frank. I'm the head of the Cultural and Press Department of the German Embassy. And in that function, you can imagine that the present topic is of special interest to us. So I just would like to deliver a very short message. My colleagues and I yesterday had the pleasure and the honor to have a guided tour at the exhibition. And apart from the fact that it is a highly interesting exhibition, we also got an insight into how much painstaking work, diligence, care you all put into realizing this project. So you talked to us and you described how many years you have been working on this project and also about the obstacles and difficulties you met. So we admire this work, we respect it highly, and as the German Embassy we are really proud and thankful, grateful to you that we have been offered the opportunity to support. I'm sure that the conference that we have the pleasure to follow today will be equally interesting, and I would like to wish everybody good success and thank you again and καλή συνέχεια. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Καλημέρα σας. Αξιότιμοι κυρίες και κύριοι, αποτελεί ιδιαίτερη τιμή για μας να συμμετέχουμε στη διοργάνωση της σημερινής ημερίδας εκ παραλλήλου με τη Διεύθυνση Νεότερης Πολιτιστικής Κληρονομιάς του Υπουργείου Πολιτισμού, το Μουσείο Ακρόπολης και το Μουσείο Μπενάκη. Ως πολιτιστικός φορέας, με ιδιαίτερο ενδιαφέρον για την παραδοσιακή αρχιτεκτονική, έχουμε υιοθετήσει μια πολυδιάστατη και ευρύτερη προσέγγιση στην πολιτιστική μας κληρονομιά. Στο πλαίσιο αυτό, έχουμε αναπτύξει μια σειρά δραστηριοτήτων που αφορούν μεταξύ άλλων καταγραφή, έρευνα, τεκμηρίωση, συλλογή υλικού, εκπαιδευτικά προγράμματα, καλλιτεχνικές δράσεις, συμμετοχή σε ημερίδες πολιτιστικού περιεχομένου και συνέργειες με άλλους φορείς όπως η Διεύθυνση Νεότερης Πολιτιστικής Κληρονομιάς του Υπουργείου Πολιτισμού. Θεωρούμε ότι η πολιτιστική μας κληρονομιά καθορίζει και την ταυτότητά μας μέσα από μια σφαιρική οπτική με ιστορική, επιστημονική, τεχνολογική, αρχαιολογική, ακόμα και καλλιτεχνική διάσταση. Πιστεύουμε ότι η δυναμική της πολιτιστικής κληρονομιάς, παράλληλα με την έμπνευση της ατομικής δημιουργικότητας, είναι βασικός παράγοντας όχι μόνο για τον πολιτισμό, αλλά και για τη γενικότερη κοινωνική πρόοδο. Η φωτογραφία, βασικό μέσο καλλιτεχνικής έκφρασης, αλλά και ιστορικής τεκμηρίωσης, κοινωνιολογικής προσέγγισης, ψυχογραφικής αποτύπωσης, καταγραφής της συλλογικής και ατομικής μνήμης, αποτελεί επίσης και συνθετικό κρίκο προσώπων, χωρών, τόπων, χρόνων και γίνεται αφορμή για αναστοχασμό, βαθύτερη γνώση και ενδοσκόπηση, στοιχεία σημαντικά για την πνευματική και πολιτιστική μας εξέλιξη. Εκπροσωπώντας σήμερα ως Γενικός Γραμματέας το Πολιτιστικό Σωματείο Άνθη της Πέτρας, θα ήθελα να μεταφέρω τους χαιρετισμούς του Προέδρου κ. Τσιαούση και όλων των μελών του Διοικητικού Συμβουλίου και να ευχηθώ καλή επιτυχία στη σημερινή ιδιαίτερα ενδιαφέρουσα ημερίδα. Ευχαριστώ.
Κυρίες και κύριοι, συγγνώμη, με φορείτε γελιά μου, γιατί δεν τα φέρω. Οφείλω θερμές ευχαριστίες στους διοργανωτές της ημερίδας για την πρόσκληση και χαίρομαι ειλικρινά που μου δίνεται η ευκαιρία να παρουσιάσω με συντομία τις προσωπικές παρατηρήσεις μου για τη συλλογή των φωτογραφιών που εκτίθενται στο Φετιχέ Τζαμί με την επιμέλεια της Διεύθυνσης Νεότερης Πολιτιστικής Κληρονομιάς του Υπουργείου Πολιτισμού. Η έκθεση έχει τον τίτλο «Με το βλέμμα του Κατακτητη» και περιλαμβάνει φωτογραφίες που τράβηξαν αποκλειστικά Γερμανοί στρατιώτες κατά τη διάρκεια της γερμανικής κατοχής της Αθήνας. Όλες τους έχουν την αξιόπιστη μαρτυρία της πρωτότυπης φωτογραφίας και το προνόμιο της πρώτης παρουσίασης. Το αναφέρω επειδή με αφορμή αυτή την έκθεση πραγματοποιείται η σημερινή τόσο σημαντική ημερίδα. Το χρονικό των φωτογραφιών των ανώνυμων Γερμανών στρατιωτών αρχίζει από την Κυριακή 27 Απριλίου 1941, όταν τα πρώτα γερμανικά στρατιωτικά τμήματα θα εισβάλλουν στην πόλη των Αθηνών. Την ίδια μέρα, μια ομάδα των εισβολέων θα υψώσει στον ιερό βράχο της Ακρόπολης τη σημαία με τον αγγυλωτό σταυρό. Η πράξη ήταν υπερβολικά κοινική, καθώς δεν την κάλυπτε ούτε ο ελάχιστος σεβασμός για το ιερότερο μνημείο της πόλης και το λαμπρότερο ίσως αρχαίο δημιούργημα του δυτικού κόσμου. Το δείχνει η πρωτότυπη διαταγή του Γερμανού στρατηγού Johann Σέρνερ, διοικητού της 6ης Ορεινής Μεραρχίας, που διορίστηκε διοικητής της κατεχόμενης Αθήνας. Στη διαταγή αυτή, που φέρει την ιδιόχειρη υπογραφή του και που εκτίθεται πρωτότυπη ως μέρος της συλλογής μου, ο Γερμανός στρατηγός, μιμούμενος τον Ναπολεόντιο ύφος, αφού εκθιάζει τους στρατιώτες του που είχαν διανύσει 1000 χιλιόμετρα μέχρι την Αθήνα, πληροφορεί ότι ένα απόσπασμα της Ορεινής Μεραρχίας είχε υψώσει τη σημαία με το σύμβολο της βάστικας στην Ακρόπολη στις 8 και 10 το πρωί της 27ης Απριλίου. Μαζί με τη σημαία θα εγκατασταθεί και μια ομάδα αντιαεροπορικής άμυνας, δείχνοντας εντονότερα τη σπατάλη της ασέβειας απέναντι στα μνημεία με τον καθολικό σεβασμό της οικουμένης. Η ελληνική σημαία πάντως θα εξακολουθεί να κυματίζει στον ίδιο χώρο. Οι σημαίες, ο Παρθενώνας και τα άλλα μνημεία της Ακρόπολης και μαζί το αντιαεροπορικό όπλο με την κάνη στραμμένη προς το Λυκαβητό θα φωτογραφηθούν πολλές φορές μέχρι την οριστική αποχώρηση των Γερμανών από την πόλη στις 12 Οκτωβρίου 1944. Στις περισσότερες φωτογραφίες το βλέμμα των στρατιωτών καταλήγει διαρκώς εκεί. Άλλωστε, η προνομιακή θέση του βραχώντη λόφου της Ακρόπολης με την πανοραμική θέα της πόλης και τον ανοιχτό ορίζοντα προσφέρεται για αναμνηστικές φωτογραφίες. Ο φωτογραφικός φακός θα διασώσει τα προσωπικά τους πορτρέτα με διακοσμητικό βάθος στον Παρθενώνα, αλλά και τα ομαδικά πορτρέτα που γεμίζουν ασφυκτικά το κάδρο με τους στρατιώτες να φωτογραφίζονται με την κυριακάτικη στολή τους μπροστά από τον Παρθενώνα, τα προπήλαια, το ναό της Αθηνάς Νίκης. Λίγες μέρες αργότερα, στις 3 Μαΐου 1941, οι γερμανικές στρατιωτικές δυνάμεις θα παρελάσουν μπροστά από το μνημείο του αγνώστου στρατιώτη. Στην εξέδρα, τιμόμενο πρόσωπο είναι ο στρατηγός Βίλκεμ Λίστ, που είχε διευθύνει την κύρια γερμανική επίθεση εναντίον της χώρας με την 12η στρατιά. Ήταν και αυτή μια κραυγαλαία ιεροσυλία, καθώς το μνημείο του αγνώστου στρατιώτη είναι το ιερότερο σημείο της ελληνικής επικράτειας. Κοντά στο Λίστ, αλλά στην απόσταση που ορίζει το τελετουργικό, θα φωτογραφηθεί και ο Ιταλός στρατηγός, για να καταδειχθεί με τον πιο πανηγυρικό τρόπο ότι τα δεκανίκια του χθεσινού νικημένου είχαν ανάγκη στήριξης τις μπότες του Γερμανού εισβολέα. Ο στρατός αγαπάει τις παρελάσεις, ακόμα και τις σκηνοθετημένες, εκείνες που γίνονται με σκοπό την επίδειξη δύναμης, ενώ ταυτόχρονα αποτελούσαν χαρακτηριστική ένδειξη της δοξομανίας του γερμανικού στρατού ύστερα από την κατάληψη μιας χώρας. Οι φωτογραφικοί φακοί των στρατιωτών θα μας αφήσουν πολλά στιγμιότυπα από εκείνη την παρέλαση. Με τα πεζοπόρα τμήματα σε πυκνούς σχηματισμούς που παρελάβουν με βήμα ηχηρό, βαρύ και ρυθμικό, σαν να θέλουν να ποδοπατήσουν την ίδια την αξιοπρέπεια της χώρας. Με τους μοτοσυκλετιστές, τα βαριά άρματα μάχης, τα μηχανοκίνητα τμήματα και φυσικά τα αεροπλάνα που πετάνε σε σχηματισμούς πάνω από το χώρο της παρέλασης και πάνω από το έθριο του ξενοδοχείου της Μεγάλης Βρετανίας, κατάμεστο από Γερμανούς. Στο διάστημα των 42 περίπου μηνών της γερμανικής κατοχής, οι Γερμανοί στρατιώτες με την άνεση του χρόνου, την ελευθερία των κινήσεων μέσα στην πόλη και κυρίως την ελευθερία φωτογράφησης και μαζί την σχετικά εύκολη για αυτούς προμήθεια φωτογραφικών υλικών, θα τραβήξουν ένα πολύ μεγάλο αριθμό φωτογραφιών με ποικίλα θέματα. Και όπως είναι φυσικό, Κύριο θέμα των φωτογραφίσεων θα παραμείνει το πορτρέτο των ιδίων αλλά και των συντρόφων τους. Ωστόσο, το τοπίο δεν χάνει το κυρίαρχο μερίδιο και δεν εξαντλείται μόνο στη φωτογράφηση των κατάσπαρτων αρχαίων μνημείων. Συνοδεύεται από πολλές άλλες λήψεις που συνδέονται με την καθημερινή ζωή της πόλης. Οι τελευταίες είναι ίσως οι πιο ενδιαφέρουσες, καθώς μας παρέχουν σημαντικά στοιχεία για την ανάκληση της εικόνας της Αθήνας εκείνη τη μακρινή εποχή. Είναι αξιοσημείωτο ότι ενώ οι φωτογραφίες αυτές προέρχονται από εκατοντάδες στρατιώτες φωτογράφους με διαφορετική αντίληψη και φωτογραφική παιδεία, δεν πάβουν να διασώζουν με μια σχεδόν ταυτόσιμη οπτική όχι μόνο τη δική τους παρουσία στην πόλη, αλλά και τη φυσιογνωμία του Αττικού τοπίου και μαζί τη δοκιμασία του λαού, που αν και στις περισσότερες φωτογραφίες δεν έχει πρωτεύουσα παρουσία μέσα στο κάδρο, υποδηλώνεται με τρόπο εμφαντικό. Άλλωστε, πολλές φορές αρκούν ελάχιστα σημάδια για να δώσουν στη φωτογραφία το δραματικό περιεχόμενο και την αξία του ντοκουμέντου. Αναμφισβήτητα χρήσιμο βοήθημα για τις περιπλανήσεις του στην πόλη αποτέλεσαν οι ολιγοσέλιδοι οδηγοί, τα Merkblätter, που είχαν τυπώσει οι γερμανικές υπηρεσίες με την εποπτεία ίσως του Γερμανικού Αρχαιολογικού Ινστιτούτου της Αθήνας και που μοιράζονταν στους στρατιώτες, καθοδηγώντας τους μέσα σε εισαγωγικά να επισκεφτούν τα πιο ενδιαφέροντα σημεία. Με ιστορικές και άλλες πληροφορίες, αυτοί οι οδηγοί που μερικοί εκτίθενται στον χώρο της έκθεσης, αρκετές φορές καθόριζαν την επιλογή των φωτογραφικών θεμάτων. Για μερικούς, αυτές οι πληροφορίες συμπλήρωναν ή ανακαλούσαν στη μνήμη τους τις ιστορικές τους γνώσεις γύρω από την αρχαία ιστορία της πόλης, χωρίς να υπολείπεται η περιέργεια και το προσωπικό ενδιαφέρον να δουν από κοντά εκείνα που είχαν μάθει ή είχαν ακούσει για την Αθήνα των κλασικών χρόνων, τον καιρό της μαθητικής τους νεότητας. Τι είναι πάντως εκείνο που δίνει ένταση στις φωτογραφίες των Γερμανών στρατιωτών? Χωρίς αμφιβολία είναι η ίδια η πόλη, που ακόμα και σε εκείνη τη ζωφερή εποχή διατηρούσε τη λάμψη και τη γοητευτική της φυσιογνωμία, ώστε να προκαλεί το φωτογραφικό φακό. Πολύτιμος σύμμαχος το λαμπρό Αττικό φως. Σχεδόν ολόκληρη η πόλη φωτογραφίζεται. Οι περισσότερες λήψεις δείχνουν να είναι τυχαία τραβηγμένες, με το φακό να κατευθύνεται όχι τόσο από τη σημαντικότητα του θέματος, όσο από τον αυθορμητισμό της στιγμής, καθώς μάλιστα δεν στοχεύουν σε καμιά επαγγελματική αναγνώριση, αρκούνται στο απλό ερέθισμα του ματιού. Ωστόσο, με τις ερασιτεχνικές τους λήψεις και τα αδέξια ίσως τραβήγματα πετυχαίνουν κάτι πολύ σημαντικό. Καταγράφουν και ρίχνουν φως σε επιμέρους πτυχές της ιστορίας της κατοχικής Αθήνας, παράλληλα με την κύρια επιδίωξή τους, που δεν είναι άλλη από τη διάσωση της προσωπικής τους ανάμνησης και ο εξωστρακισμός της λύθης. Εκτός από τις φωτογραφίες με το αξεπέραστο κάλος της Ακρόπολης που θα κοσμήσουν σε περίοπτη θέση τις σελίδες των φωτογραφικών τους λευκομάτων, θα φωτογραφηθεί με επαναληπτική συχνότητα ολόκληρη γύρω περιοχή, όπως ο ναός του Ηφαίστου, αλλά και το οδείο Ηρόδου του Αττικού, που στις κερκίδες του αποθανατίζονται Γερμανοί στρατιωτικοί να παρακολουθούν μουσικές εκδηλώσεις με μέλη των οικογενειών τους. Και φυσικά ο χώρος με τους επιβλητικούς στήλους του Ολυμπίου Διός. Χαρακτηριστικές είναι οι φωτογραφίες με το αντιαεροπορικό πυροβόλο που έχει στηθεί μόνιμα δίπλα στους μεγαλοπρεπείς στήλους και η φωτογραφία με το στρατιώτη που ασκεί την ισορροπία του βηματισμού του πάνω στα μέλη του πεσμένου πελώριου κύωνα. Οι Γερμανοί θα καταλάβουν το Ολυμπιακό κολυμβητήριο της περιοχής του Ζαπίου που είχε εγκαινιαστεί ένα χρόνο πριν. Θα χρησιμοποιήσουν τις εγκαταστάσεις του για τις ανάγκες αποκλειστικά των Γερμανών στρατιωτών. Λίγο πιο πάνω βρίσκεται το Παναθηναϊκό στάδιο, σύμβολο της αναγεννημένης Ολυμπιακής ιδέας. Οι μαρμάρινες κερκίδες του είναι καμουφλαρισμένες και τα προπήλαια με τους κορινθιακούς κύονες δεν είχαν κατεδαφιστεί ακόμη τότε. Σε μερικές φωτογραφίες διακρίνεται στις κερκίδες ένα πλήθος από θεατές, όλοι τους στρατιωτικοί, να παρακολουθούν κάποια εορταστική εκδήλωση. Πιθανόν μία από τις ποικίλες εκδηλώσεις που διοργάνωναν κυρίως για την επέτειο των γενεθλίων του Χίτλερ και που την γιόρταζαν με στρατιωτικές παρενάσεις και άλλες φανταχτερές επιδείξεις. Η κεντρική λεωφόρος Πανεπιστημίου με τα εξαιρετικής αισθητικής και ιστορικής σημασίας κτίρια θα αποτελέσει δημοφιλές σημείο φωτογράφησης. Ιδιαίτερα μπροστά από την περίτεχνη καμπύλη σκάλα της Εθνικής Βιβλιοθήκης θα φωτογραφηθούν πολλοί από τους στρατιώτες. Στον ίδιο περίπου χώρο, στην οδό Κοραή, βρίσκεται το κτίριο που στεγάζεται η Κομμαντατούρ, το γερμανικό φροαρχείο. Οι φωτογραφίες δείχνουν ένα μεγάλο πανό με αυτή την ονομασία αναπτυγμένο μέχρι το απέναντι κτίριο. Αποτελούσε φόβητρο για τρομοκράτηση περισσότερο παρά για πληροφόρηση, καθώς τα υπόγεια του κτηρίου μεταφέρονταν όσοι πατριώτες συλλαμβάνονταν για να δοκιμάσουν και να εκτιμήσουν τις μεθόδους συνετισμού που εφάρμοζε η δικαιοσύνη, μέσα σε εισαγωγικά, του κατακτητή. Δείχνουν ακόμα ένα πλήθος στρατιωτικών αυτοκινήτων να είναι σταθμευμένα έξω από το κτίριο, ακόμα και ένα ερπιστριοφόρο για κάθε ενδεχόμενο. Η πόλη με τα μεγαλοπρεπή δημόσια κτίρια αλλά και τα ιδιωτικά μέγαρα προσφερόταν για φωτογραφικές προσεγγίσεις. Στα φωτογραφικά τους φιλμ θα διασώσουν τις όψεις του μεγαλόπρεπου κινηματογράφου Rex, του διπλανού κινηματογράφου Τιτάνια, αλλά και άλλων κινηματογράφων, όπου συνήθως προβάλλονταν έργα για την ψυχαγωγία των Γερμανών στρατιωτών και μαζί στιγμιότυπα και απόψεις από γνωστούς δρόμους και πλατείες, όπως την πλατεία της Ομονίας με τα νεοκλασικά οικοδομήματα γύρω της. Οι λούστροι, οι μικροπολιτές και οι εφήμερες συναλλαγές τους, οι ευκαιριακοί πλανόντιοι μικροέμποροι με την ετερόκλητη πραγμάτια τους απλωμένοι στο πεζοδρόμιο, όπως δείχνουν οι φωτογραφίες από τις περιοχές της οδού Αθηνάς και το Μοναστηράκι, αλλά και οι απλοί άνθρωποι στο δρόμο και στις αγορές, που αν και δεν ενδιαφέρονται να μπουν στο φωτογραφικό κάδρο, γίνονται συχνά παθητικοί αποδέκτες του φωτογραφικού φακού. Όλες αυτές οι φωτογραφίες δεν έχουν το στοιχείο της σκοπιμότητας όπως οι φωτογραφίες με τις κατασκευασμένες φωτογραφικές αλήθειες των επαγγελματιών φωτογράφων της υπηρεσίας προπαγάνδας που φωτογράφησαν θέματα για λογαριασμό της γερμανικής προπαγανδιστικής μηχανής. Αν και πολλοί από τους ερασιτέχνες στρατιώτες φωτογράφους είχαν γίνει μάρτυρες εφιαλτικών εικόνων, όπως το καθημερινό θέαμα με τους νεκρούς πολίτες που πέθαιναν από την ασιτεία στους δρόμους της πόλης. Ωστόσο, και παρά την αυστηρή απαγόρευση της λογοκρισίας που δεν επέτρεπε στους Γερμανούς στρατιώτες να φωτογραφίζουν ευαίσθητα θέματα, καθώς θα μπορούσαν να ενοχλήσουν συνειδήσεις και να προκαλέσουν στον ίδιο το γερμανικό λαό ενδεχόμενη οργή και αγανάκτηση, αυτοί οι ερασιτέχνες φωτογράφοι ενσωμάτωσαν στις αναμνηστικές λήψεις τους και τις λιγοστές φωτογραφίες που παρουσιάζονται στην έκθεση και που έχουν παραβιάσει, ενδεχομένως τυχαία, τις απαγορευτικές οδηγίες και τον έλεγχο της λογοκρισίας. Λήψεις που δείχνουν παιδιά ξαπλωμένα στον δρόμο, το ένα δίπλα στο άλλο για να ζεσταθούν ή δίπλα σε χώρους σκουπιδιών, τους ηλικιωμένους στην είσοδο κάποιου κέντρου διανομής συσιτίου, αλλά και παιδιά που περιμένουν τη φιλέσπλαχνη κίνηση του Γερμανού που βρίσκεται πάνω στο καμιόνι για να ρίξει στο τενεκετέμιο δοχείο τους λίγο φαγητό. Ένα μέρος των φωτογραφιών που εκτίθεται είναι αφιερωμένο στους νεκρούς Γερμανούς στρατιώτες και βαθμοφόρους. Πολύ τακτικά το στρατιωτικό νεκροταφείο που βρίσκεται στο προάστιο της Αθήνας στο Διόνυσο χάνει τη γαλήνη του, καθώς ένα άγημα με επιβλητική παρουσία, όπως αρμόζει στην περίπτωση, με βλέμματα σκληρά, όψεις άκαμπτες και αυστηρές και με τα όπλα στραμμένα στον ανοιχτό ορίζοντα, αποδίδει με το παράγγελμα μια ομοφροντία με ηχηρές τιμές. Τα συναισθήματα απουσιάζουν. ανέκφραστοι στρατιώτες, όπως τους έχουν αποθανατήσει οι φωτογραφικοί φακοί, κατεβάζουν τα φέρετρα στους φρέσκοσκαμμένους τάφους. Φέρετρα, όπλα και ομοφροντίες σε μια άσκοπη συσσόρευση. Πολλές από αυτές τις φωτογραφίες ίσως να φαίνονται λήψεις μοναχικές, χωρίς την ιδιαίτερη καλλιτεχνική επιμέλεια των ταλαντούχων φωτογράφων όπως προανέφερα. Αλλά από τους στρατιώτες που αποστολή τους ήταν να σέρνονται στα χαρακόμματα, να μάχονται, να θάβουν το σκοτωμένο σύντροφο και κάποτε να σκοτώνονται και οι ίδιοι, δεν έχει κανείς ιδιαίτερες καλλιτεχνικές απαιτήσεις. Άλλωστε, την προσωπική τους ιστορία αφηγούνται. Ωστόσο, οι φωτογραφίες τους δεν παύουν να παρέχουν ένα ενισχυτικό ερέθισμα για μελέτη εκείνης της μακρινής γεμάτης αίματα εποχής και μαζί μια σημαντική πηγή πληροφόρησης, αποσπασματική ίσως, σημαντική όμως για την ιστοριογραφία της πόλης. Ίσως γι' αυτό το λόγο αυτές οι φωτογραφίες να είναι πολύτιμες. Οδυνηρό πάντως αντάλλαγμα για την κατοχική βαρβαρότητα. Σας ευχαριστώ.
Yes, it's okay. Dear Mrs. Frank, dear Annie, Ira, Yanis, and all the others, ladies and gentlemen, I certainly do feel extremely honored by the fact that I'm invited for this lecture here, both as a scientist, as a German-born citizen of Europe. With all the sufferings of your country from the German occupation in World War II, and Mr. Peterson described this very well now, with all the well-founded animosities between our countries, it's more than astonishing to be enabled again to give a lecture on a subject that will supposedly hurt your feelings only by showing the images in it. Meanwhile, I will try to stick to what I was invited for, a by all means preliminary account of the photographic history of the Nazi occupation in Greece, and especially in Athens, in the years of 1941 to 42, as presented in the collection of Mr. Biometers, to whom my gratitude goes on and on. Photographic history, as a specialized form of media history, contains two areas of interest. A production history, which means the history of photographers, apparatus and media components to be used under certain circumstances, and for the means of persuasion and or documentation, and the history of prejudices, stereotypes, and interests caused by existing photographs or in the process of constituting memory with images, which you might name a history of recension. Today, more than 75 years after the atrocities of the German occupation of Greece, this is the more important part of the writing history. But as I am from the child generation of the actors, I have to start with a personal basic remark. More than 3 decades of my scientific life I have spent in researching German photography in its obvious as well visible as hidden relation to the Nazi regime, its forerunners and successors. The result are widespread attempts between an organizational history, the book on the left contains roughly 300 laws, edicts and daily informations dealing with photography and propaganda, and an oral history. I've interviewed more than 50 photographers, from political as Jewish exiles to, for instance, some of the University family. Thus, the following presentation vibrates between a number of historic methods, from the personal interview to the archival research to the evaluation of documents. This methodic openness has a biographical background which might be typical for a German scientist of my generation. When I started to get trained in photography with two famous modernists in advertising and design, I had to learn that both had a firm background in the Nazi regime. I will use this abbreviation for the rest of my lecture. In propaganda as well as in the ideology of their aesthetics. But what I learned there was the use of traditional photographic techniques that enable me today to give old images a closer look. And in more than one aspect, the look on the amateur material provided by Mr. Meter's collection traces back to my own practices in photography by discerning the different sorts of paper used and following the obvious as hidden mistakes made by the photographers in their laboratories while processing the images. An important source to these images, of course, is the message written on the back, either by the photographer, by the developing workshop, by a censorship authority, by the image collector, or by a later archivist. I will come back to this from time to time. My lecture will consist of 4 parts. First, a very short introduction into the official propaganda theory that forms the background of all photographic activities in the Nazi state, and especially while World War II. Methodically, I will follow ideas of Zygmunt Bauman, who considered the Nazi state and the settings of the Holocaust as a matter of industrial modernization and thus modernism. Then I will describe in equally short terms the role of the official war propaganda as a means of disinformation, especially as forming the stereotypes and foundations of the propaganda-wise most important private photography as a mean of collective memory. From there, I would like to proceed to the images of Athens displayed in the Barometer's collection and some more or less vague assumptions on the messages hidden in them. The 1920s saw a number of books on the new professions in advertising, public relation, and any form of concerned or concessioned communication. As a playwright and poet without fortune, Joseph Goebbels must have read these publications with great interest, most of them through the eyes of Hans Domislav, who transferred these theses by Bernet, son-in-law of Sigmund Freud, and Lippmann, columnist at the New York Times, into a very German but effective technique of pushing ideas into people's minds. Domislav also added a visual component to the strictly rhetorical thesis of Bernet and Lippmann, from the logo sign to photography, which both of them had not yet been included in their theories. After the installation of the Nazi government in 1933, all communications were meant to be bundled up in the Ministry of Propaganda and People's Information, which immediately followed a very modern line, mostly instigated by Italian fascism. Up to the Berlin Olympic Games of 1936, the regime tried to keep up with graphic designers from the Bauhaus and other modern academies. But basically the Nazis were not really interested in the visual aspects of the influence on the people, as Bernet and Lippmann never done. The Department of Photography and Picture Journalism was run by a young SA man, Heiner Kurzbein, whose main interest was occupied by requiring the newest and most expensive cameras for himself. At the same time, there was a severe loss to the great scene of image journalism and picture press editors in Germany by the new anti-Semitic laws. These people immigrated in large numbers already between 1933 and 1935. The loss was so strong that the quality in photographic journalism was extremely reduced, which led to special conditions for Jewish photographers, like for instance Alfred Eisenstadt, who was especially invited to cover Hindenburg's funeral in 1934, although he had left the country a year before. And the regime had to return to old tricks by having film sequences presented as the real moment of political happening. When Adolf Hitler was installed as the Chancellor in January 1933, only few people marched up to his balcony. Thus, one had to present the large numbers of demonstrators in later books by using a film scene from June 1933. The modern aspects of these tricks were settled in an as clear, as deep, as modern understanding of the media. Do not change the images after they have been taken, like for instance the Soviet propaganda did, simply change the reality in front of the camera. This was even more important as the amateur photographer was seen as the only solution to the propaganda problem of documenting the good life. The amateurs were to make all the millions of images that form the memory of the idyllic scenery of living under Hitler. Of course, the regime needed the official photographs in masses to cover their activities in papers and magazines, but they needed even more the simple everyday photographs of happy families and lovely countrysides. It was an education in looking away from the facts of politics, including the Holocaust. This momentum of strategy wasn't even an original idea of Nazi propaganda, but taken from both the photographic industry, with cheap cameras being thrown on the market during the recession years, and the communist workers' photography movement, which was the strongest in Europe, and the one with the most modern photography. This is not the place to explain these takeovers from modernism in detail, but it was one of the most successful strategies within the Nazi propaganda, especially in its long-term function of producing a collective positive memory of these times, which is then the basis of Mr. Mitu's collection. The common goal of these strategies was, of course, the war as an aggressive expansion of the country. Thus, all of the propaganda activities aimed at their use in military context, both from both sides of the image as from the professional side. For documenting any military operation, Goebbels had early plans of setting up a so-called propaganda company, propaganda battalions, I will use the abbreviation PK from now on. The first attempt to form a military unit for producing written and image propaganda being set up in spring 1936 for showing the remilitarization of the Rhine country. The first PK was formed for the fascist troops in Spain, and as they proved to be comparatively successful in mounting a number of well-read texts as well as several series of photographic images, the installation of PK troop as an important part of the so-called total war, the preparation of which was decided in October 1937, were executed from the beginning of World War II. Each PK battalion consisted of a number of 3 to 4 writers and radio presenters, or 1 to 2 painters and draftsmen, or 1 to 2 cameramen for filming, and of 4 to 5 photographers, of more or less a large technical supply for these men, and most important, a courier service between the front and the developing as well as censorship centers in Berlin, Vienna and Wolfen, which were the ACFA company headquarters. All in all, there were 7 PK battalions in the army, 4 at the Marine and 4 with the flying troops. And from 1941, a sort of super PK under the auspices of the military commander-in-chief, which produced the magazine Signal as well as the main parts of the weekly newsreels for the German cinemas. By the way, the photographers of this troop would become the most important post-war photographers in Western Germany in magazines like Spiegel and Stern. The PK battalion responsible for news and documentary coverage of the Balkan and Greece was the PK 690. And obviously, due to the difficult task of committing large numbers of war crimes, being named fight against partisans, the writers, camera operators and photographers changed in quick succession. Gerhard Gronefeld, later a well-known photographer, was with the troops on the Balkan but left short after entering Greece and taking a few pictures on the Acropolis Hill. Those who were in Greece have left no trail in the history of photography for good reasons. Their work covers the low-quality level of daily journalism in Germany's 1930s, after dismissal of the Jewish photographers. The German National Archive presents in their online offering roughly 650 photographs of Greece, including the images of the brutal war terror committed by German soldiers. Not all of these images were made within PK 690, but by SS photographers as well, who had a different form of distribution. The SS had its own press and picture agency with a darkroom and printery, named Friedrich Franz Bauer, its own censorship and its own courier services. Thus, the photographs of the massacres and war crimes of German soldiers on the Greek population, as they were listed in the large exhibitions of the 1990s, were either taken by the members of the PK 690 or by SS soldiers who were not necessarily professional photographers, as most of the PK photographers, but felt themselves as military elite using just another cultural technology. as did, for instance, the poet Erwin Strittmatter with writing while belonging to an SS police unit in Greece. And none of these photographers were meant for publication. The photographers considered them as a mere documentation of their own life. There was a different sort of cultural propaganda alongside most of the occupations by German troops too. Basically, these efforts were undertaken in order to form an ideological, mostly racist background to all forms of expansion of the German Reich, and included as a very modern form the most important media of the time, photography and film. When there were plans of a forthcoming occupation, the Department of Film and Photography in the Ministry of Propaganda started to search for more or less well-known photographers and filmmakers and writers who were on the edge of producing or already had done a production, a documentary film, or a book on the touristic and cultural aspects of the country or region proposed. Stefan Krukenhauser, at this time well known as a photographer as well as a ski trainer, was financed by both the camera company Leitz as by the film company Agfa, and the publishing house received an order for a large number of printed books by the propaganda ministry just short before the Germans marched into Austria. The same seemed to have happened to Joachim Gerstenberg, although he was no more allowed to name companies and orders that the book was published only short after the military actions undertaken by the Germans in Greece. It was roughly 6 weeks later, so it was distributed in June 1941. These books were too large to work as knapsack literature, but they were meant to be part of the baggage of higher-ranked soldiers. His book describes the average German impression any German intellectual should have of Greek antiquities, countryside, and peasants. The choice of motives and subjects were carefully prepared. Except for one image, there was no hint on Athens as a large city with a metropolitan life. There was neither a photograph nor a story on or in Thessaloniki. Only one line in the book mentions that it's not worth to consider a visit there. The book ends up with 2 symbolic pages, one showing the hill of the Acropolis, the other a sunset over Cap Sunion. The Acropolis is given the German name of the god's castle, thus referring more to Aryan mythology than on Greek antiquity, and sunsets are the everlasting moment of 6 sentiments, especially when it is presented in the context of an occupation. As known from this author, he had published 3 more books in the same manner, each on Bulgaria, Ireland and Greenland. The photographs were exactly what was needed for so-called neutral cultural travel literature. Well done, but boring. But as in literature, there were figures like Erhard Kästner in photography too. They were aiming to produce large-format photo books on the occupied Greece as well. Herbert List had been living in Athens since summer 1937, and it was the most productive time of his life as a photographer. Subsequently, he tried to publish his photographs from Greece in a similar manner as Gerstenberg had done, and there were numbers of publishers interested, but List seemed to have left Athens before the Germans arrived. In fact, he was leaving in February 1941. There are different versions in history on the date and the reasons why List had to leave Greece before being able to produce a book. He claims to have made the photographs on the right as the last in Greece, but there are a number of doubts on the stories delivered by both List and his lifetime companion Max Scheler. There would have been a good chance to have a book like the one List planned, as any German occupation during World War II was accompanied by large takeovers of printing and publishing capacities. For instance, we know of roughly 80 privately printed books of German photographers during the occupation of Paris alone. But these private print publications seem to be missed until now in Greek history, as well as color photographs that must have been made in larger numbers. They do seem not to have been in the eyes of collectors so far. When German troops started to occupy Greece in April 1941, they were accompanied by the already named PK 690 with the photographers Jessen and Teschendorf. Of course, they started with the usual program, hissing the flag of the Acropolis, and Mr. Mitros has described the crime being done so. the signing of the Greek capitulation on April 23, 1941, which seems to be the first photograph. Tanks in the streets of bigger cities and in the countryside. And last but not least, the so-called warm welcome of the troops by the Greek population, including the caring soldier as a standard stereotype. There had to be regulations though, and these were recorded too, as well as resulting punishments after so-called war crime trials. These ugly images sure represent the dark ages of German occupation, and the images clearly show that the photographers knew exactly that they were all too friendly witnesses of the crimes executed by the occupants. But it is typical for the different strategies in war photography that Max Mertens did not rely on the normal Piquet photographers when committing his crimes and injustice on the Jewish population of Thessaloniki, but ordered the young Cologne journalist Walter Dick, well known in his hometown as a fierce Nazi ideologist, to record his offences. None of these violent acts are commemorated from Athens. Through the beginning looks similar in the photograph. Traveling into town on long distance roads looks like a holiday tour. When you come into town, everybody is greeting you. Maybe not as friendly as in rural areas and on professional propaganda photographs, but at least people are interested and have a look at the occupants. Going into town by railway is even more boring, and thus the first walk is up to the Acropolis. Every collection of war photographs from Greece has hundreds of images from this place, always with a flag and with a temple in the background, nearly always in bright sun and taken from below, thus showing not only the splendor of the place, but the self-imagination as godly creatures as well, even for the most common soldier. By far the greatest part of Mr. Mito's collections on Athens consists of amateur photography, but even there you can tell different qualities and technique in view. Supposedly, these images were taken by higher ranks that had looked at photographic books and or visual arts before. Carefully chosen viewpoints and foregrounds are equally important to the photographer as the perfectly placed flag in the middle of the photograph. There are relatively few professional Piquet photographs of the German occupation in Athens, and those few simply follow the rules of the so-called concerned amateurs. Willy Antonowitz, basically a photographer from the agency of Hitler's home photographer Heinrich Hoffmann, places a cannon in the foreground of a temple column, situates a soldier on the side, and lets him look into some distant future. That is the symbol of German care for the antique grandeurs, and an offense, as Mr. Mito has described. Strangely enough, this photograph follows exactly the rules that the propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels did not want to see. Hitler lonesome cannon under the tree, as he named it. Here is a lonesome cannon before an equally lonesome column with a bored soldier aside. However, the most boring aspect of military photography is the most common too. Groups in front of an important place. Here, of course, this has to be the Acropolis, and it has to be combined with the flag. A no-go area in picture composition, as you may gather from dozens of similar photographs in the Mito's collection. Slightly more interesting is the second largest stock of images under German occupation. The Grand Parade on May 3, 1941. Most of these images cannot show what they described as the photographers had been standing alongside the road, without being able to see more than the small section given to them by the surrounding crowd. Some, however, managed to gain a place on the lamppost, as the left view seems to come from, or a balcony on the roadside house, which even allows sequences of images describing the different types of battalions walking along. Of course, reverse sides note all important names and titles. This is old-style military, even under the auspices of World War II. Another important topic of the soldiers' amateur photographs were the office buildings in which they were placed. The more important the building, the higher one's own office and the higher one's own recommendation, the prouder the description on the reverse side. As the SS regarded themselves as an elite troop, they of course gave a proud remark on the images of their office. The truck driver, however, who had to live in his own truck, describes it here as his own hotel. The arrogance of the occupiers is well shown on an album page like this. The photographs are simple collections of men and places, but the captions give them a different appeal. The victims of the occupation and the quarter making are not only described in merciless words, but show the full aggression of the administrative means. Any responsibility is handed over to the captain quartermaster, and the lack of empathy is carrying the remarks on the reverse pages without images. The best for me, or at least us, and the worst for them. Images of private quarters normally carry captions like, "These are the streets of Athens, that's the way they live," and thus show the big-headedness of the occupiers. Of course, this is not a view of the higher ranks. They simply show the places where they are, or give the view from their hotel window. Their interests go into another direction. They want to identify their superiority over the contemporary Greek population by getting themselves adjusted to antique splendor. The album shows the marks of a so-called concerned amateur photographer, following the proposals given by the knapsack literature, and combines this with an old-fashioned language in the captions, which is, by the way, ends up in very modern remarks like statistics on visitor seats, etc. This ambiguity between the occupier's arrogance and the eternal ideas of humanity in the post-war era has been described sufficiently at length by the historian Harvey Fletcher. The self-sublimation by sitting in uniform on a priest's chair not only shows a total lack of decency, but clarify why the occupiers never could think about the violence of their acts in later years. The high rank of occupying Athens as a pseudo-cultural act is underlined by a number of events happening throughout the occupation. Directly after the occupation started in mid-May 1941, a troupe of actors was sent to Athens under the direction of Arthur Maria Rabenalt, a specialist for light-white propaganda comedy films. The film produced was named Front Theatre, which is the name of the propaganda units that played in front of soldiers all around the occupied countries. The story is a simple husband-wife drama on jealousy, and the happy end happens on the Acropolis. When the film was released in September 1942, Goebbels did not like it because of its too simple story and characters, but the film was well taken by the public and was a big success in Germany. That an amateur photographer names the actors an elite actors troupe fits on both ends. They act as a front theatre troupe, and they produce a film of the same type. In this sense, the photographs display the high rank of Athens' occupation in contrast to other cities that may have been far more important in military or economic terms. There was an opera stage set up on one place. Whenever there were concerts or sport games, the representatives were present. Even the smallest events were broadcasted in German radio programs, and more than one weekly newsreel Wochenschau showed happenings in Athens. The photographers at place, however, did not spend too much interest in these events. And if you have a close look at, for instance, the stadium in the sport games, there were only handfuls of spectators to be seen. The streets were a more common subject of photography, and nearly each album or narrative had to begin with the important buildings like the Academy or the Palace in Parliament. Important for all soldiers is their medical care and welfare, and thus these places take an important role in all albums of war memories. But none of the photographers at the place noticed that they were visiting one of the best pieces of modern architecture in Athens, the Sismanou Hospital by Pimenoulis and G. Economidis, opened in December 1936. There's only one photograph in the large number of examples from here that cares for the architecture. But the information technologies were always something to look at, and of course the nice ladies of the sanitary department. Although there were nearly no military actions reported in Athens throughout the occupation, which does not reduce the amount of atrocities committed by the occupiers in general, there were German soldiers dying and had to be buried. Most of the burials, however, had been made to pompous celebrations, forcing old traditions against any form of warfare and modernity. Again, photography was used to stabilize the stereotypes brought from home, mostly considering the difference between the old culture and the new living in misery, even on the cemetery. Thus, many street views remark that there was a large black market, even if you cannot see it, or how this market is different from legal ones. Strangely enough, these images look exactly the same as those of the German post-war period, and they always were equipped with stories of a forbidden subject to photograph, which simply wasn't true. More clear into the rank of stereotyping the Greek population as poor and backwards, minded got the dozens of images that show the shoe shine business on the street. For various reasons, shoe shiners had disappeared from German streets throughout the 1930s, and so the remarks on the reverse side with the abbreviations and quotations of the shouts offered by the most often very young shoe shiners give a demonstration notion of how high German noses and the brows were raised against the Greek, or at least the Athens population. The same goes for the equal dozens of photographs of overcrowded city trams, something that had not happened in Germany since World War I. The remarks on the pictures are of the same quality as those on the shoe shiners. Traffic problems are described as habits. The qualities of streets, which had been the real propaganda item of Hitler's regime even until today's right-wing parties, is also a typical subject of annotations to the images. A bit strange may sound that all poor quarters of the city are denominated as Turkish quarters, but which does not really make sense. The Greek population is always seen as to be underrated in comparison to the German soldiers, but if the Turkish are even lower, why should they have been partners in World War I? These stereotypes go even further. They may even escape the levels of censorship introduced in collections like the one of Mr. Meters. On the left image, daily laborers are waiting for a new job, which is described on the reverse side with words as a fake quotation in first-person language on the level of a child. The images on the right go even further. The introduction of a business is exactly given as in propaganda films like Yüzüz. The quotation is an equally fake Viennese dialect phrase, contains a strict anti-Semitic message: beware of all Jewish and all Greek street merchants. This is similar to another photograph of Mr. Mito's collection from Thessaloniki. It shows the installation of the ghetto in the Baron Hirsch quarter of Thessaloniki and reads Saloniki vis-à-vis to the railway station: filthy, smelly, ramshackle. Even if the photograph does not show these elements in the description of the back, it tells how to read it. These words are exactly the words used in the description of the Warsaw Ghetto in the Berlin Illustrated paper, with an issue of 2 million copies, so nobody had to escape from them. And they were used in the propaganda for fixing the fact of a genocide by phrases of house cleaning. These words were written on the backside of the image decades later, showing that only racism and anti-Semitism have never left the mind of these soldiers. This brings me to the end of my survey with a short idea on the different levels of censorship these images had to escape for becoming parts of Mr. Mito's collection and being displayed here in the exhibition. Official PK photographers like Gerhard Gronefeld delivered their films either to the local PK unit or went to Berlin to the central PK lab, where the films were processed and juried by the Central Command, PKW, immediately, inclusive the daily delivery of images to Goebbels for his view on the war. Those images that fitted to his ideas were handed over to the press, and they went to the Central PK archive, which today is considered to be lost, but I'm not sure about. Private photographs were either processed locally, like the one on the left, and carried a local censorship number for private use, that's the 821, or they were processed after the soldier's return to his hometown and received a mark by the local dealer there. These dealers had the obligation to pre-censor all images that could gain attention by the censorship authorities, and actually censored much material before it was handed back to the amateur photographers. Many images were processed after the war and collected into albums. They often carried no remark on the reverse side except for private collection numbers. With these post-war collections, you have several levels of censorship. First, the photographer himself decides what to process of his material and what to place in an album or package of images to be privately archived. Second, after a number of years, the collector decides which images survive when he prepares a last album for presentation, for instance with a veterans club or whatever. Third, after the death of the collector, his family decides which images are to be offered to either antiquars or in auctions. They make money, a lot of money in many cases, but produce a history that may not be consistent with what the family thinks of their fathers and grandfathers. A collector like Mr. Meters decides what can be shown in exhibitions and what not. That's number 4. Altogether, with the delivery from the processing lab, you have at least 5 levels of censorship that you have to take in account when looking at the vast material provided by the wonderful curators of this exhibition. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Most of you have seen me already. I'm in the honor of chairing this morning session, and I will make each introduction extremely short because we have lots of subjects to deal with. My suggestion would be that we have a panel debate after all these lectures of the morning are got done, because many of these lectures have similar subjects, have overlapping, including mine, and I suppose the best thing is if you count up your questions to the individual speakers by waiting until we have a panel debate at the end of this morning. So my first introduction is something I very much like to, because I always admired Petra Bob as one of the best researchers in Germany on war photography, especially on photography of the Second World War. She has run numerous researches on this and has written an awful lot of texts on this and a great deal of work, and she influenced whole generations of researchers in this subject. Most of all, people in Germany know her for rearranging the exhibition on the crimes of the Wehrmacht, which has a lot to do, of course, with Greece and which will be an important part of any history written on the Second World War. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Petra Bob. She is talking about forced images, ambivalent connotations of Wehrmacht soldiers in Greece. Thank you.
Can I still say good morning now? Okay. Thank you so much, Saxe, for the introduction. Dear Iro, Janni and Anni, and all of you, of course. I'm really deeply grateful to be invited for this conference. I really appreciate knowing the exhibition, knowing Björn Meters personally, and hearing about his collection. Speaking about German soldiers' photos here is a touching and challenging experience for me. Working since 25 years about such photos, it's even more demanding in a country like Greece, where people suffered so much during these 4 years of occupation. I hope I can give you some aspects of the way how I analyzed such photos in the context of military situations and literature. I shall first give you some remarks about private war photography of the Wehrmacht soldiers. Second, I speak about some photos, only some, of Athens of my research collection. And third, I'll present you, as a first time in public, a collection of a soldier given to the archive of the Hamburg Institute of Social Research, about 4 years stay in Crete as one of the highly responsible officers in the region of Chania. So this is, I changed my paper completely when I knew this collection. It's only some weeks I know it, but it's so astonishing that I do it. First of all, you see this sort of icon photo just in front of the Acropolis of a soldier you can see in later. And I will translate to you in English the German phrases. Soldiers, you came into this country rich of old cultural sites as a winner of unique force with weapons. So be worthy of your actions and especially be worthy of your great Führer and patron of all culture, Adolf Hitler. Your behavior at these old cultural sites must be like at home. Save the memorials of every damage. Do not write or lubricate signs of your names on them. Behave always like German soldiers. So they knew how to behave to go to the Acropolis. First, conditions of photographing in the NS and during the war. I quote, "We believe in the objectivity of the camera and have our doubts about what is conveyed to us by the ear or through letters." With these words, Goebbels inaugurated the exhibition Die Kamera in November 1933 in Berlin. And he continued, "The human of our days wants to see himself, and he has a right to it, by the high standard of the art of photography and the illustrated press. He can demand the evidence in black and white, with a photo, that new times are coming. Our modern artificial eye, the camera, is the oath witness, Schwurzeuge, for these new times." This is one more picture of this exhibition. Goebbels called upon an army of millions of amateur photographers, his words, to educate the nation according to the principles of National Socialist propaganda. He used the extensive and wide scene of amateur and vernacular photography which existed during the 20s and early 30s in the last century in Germany. With many orders, he forced everyone into the ideologically enclosed Volksgemeinschaft, people's community. Photojournals, exhibitions, fairs of the photo industry, and amateur associations were brought into line. Special subjects like family, working, home, and regional homeland pictures were promoted by competitions and courses at the Kraft durch Freude institution with the slogan, "Put your camera into the service of the people." The Reichsverband Deutscher Amateurfotografen, the Association for German Amateur Photographers, collected photos of everyone and used them for propaganda purposes. Quote, "You own your camera not just for fun." In 1937, 4 years after the exhibition Die Kamera, Goebbels showed round about 800 photos of the army of amateur photographers at the monstrous exhibition Gebt mir 4 Jahre Zeit, Give Me 4 Years, in Berlin. And he reinforced the products of the photo industry of the World Fair in Paris in the same year. With such image politics, the regime succeeded in the idea of a so-called pictorial script of the German people, die Bildschrift des Volkes. In 1939, at the beginning of the war, the Ministry of Propaganda called on the population to continue using their cameras, the soldiers at the front, the women at home. In addition to written correspondence, The snapshots should serve to strengthen the cohesion between the front and back home. Some 10% of all Germans owned a camera in these years, and many soldiers bought cameras during the war or looted them in the occupied countries. So they willingly complied to Goebbels' demand, quote, "At this time it is the unconditional duty of every soldier to keep his camera in action." A young Wehrmacht soldier followed this order, quote, "When I was a soldier, it was powerful. The cheap lightweight cameras made by Agfa, Kodak or Vogtländer made it easier for recruits to buy and use them." And you see up, it's the famous Leica, which you can also see at the exhibition. Down it's Robert, also in the exhibition. And down it's Agfa box, the cheapest camera. This resulted in vast numbers of private photographs being produced by soldiers during the Second World War, quantitatively equal to the millions of images taken by the Nazi propaganda units. In the family and travel photography of the 30s, the snapshot taker usually focused on people he knew personally, such as family and friends. But what changed when these soldiers went to war, invaded foreign countries and directed their cameras at landscapes, civilian populations, prisoners of war, the wounded and the dead? The soldiers had already gained practice taking pictures of comrades, troop units, life in the barracks and military drills long before the war through the official albums of the Hitler Youth and the Reichsarbeitsdienst, the RAD. Reich Leiber Service. In these, and you see here one of these prefabricated albums. In these albums and photos, the concentration is on the integration of the individual into the group. A viewpoint stereotypically repeated at the beginning of every war album with pictures of the soldiers swearing in, and you see one, as an example, one page of the albums. So the big one shows the swearing in, or the soldier in the barracks proudly posing in his new uniform as in an image of a soldier's album. It shows one of the typical situations of photographing during the military service. The interest of photographing and being photographed, even by a bystander, an officer. If we imagine also the photographer of the whole scene, the subject of taking snapshots is implicit and explicit present. The whole scene is focused on representation of being photographed and the act of photographing, even with the shadow of the photographing soldier. The uniform inside looks not into the camera, but has his eyes nearly closed. He presents himself quite comfortable in the sunny open door of the barrack. The officer bystanding and the two photographers, everyone is fixed on him. In this way, the photo represents the demand of Hitler with the pure intention to keep his camera in action. Here we have even two cameras in action, with the chief as an onlooker and/or controlling spectator. Increasingly, the eye of the camera became part of the troops during free time, in the evening, at home, in the barracks, or at the company party. The gaze was no longer directed at the comrades from the outside. Rather, the photographer himself was in the midst of the action, looking over his fellow soldiers' shoulders to burning and destroying sceneries, as here in a French village. I was often told that soldiers' albums show only spots of barracks and marching scenes, without photos from fights. But no, soldiers wanted to give evidence of danger and chaotic situations, but also of the dead and conquered enemy. Soldiers got the films normally from their families at home and sent the exposed films back for developing and printing to photo labs in Germany. Then the prints were sent back to the front, and very often soldiers ordered copies for their comrades. Even the lab itself cared about such pictures from the front. Quote, "Our soldiers are keen photographers. They take a lot of pictures," the owner of a photo lab told one of his female customers in 1941 as he added photographs by a soldier named Georg into a sample book of frontline images that could be ordered by every member of the troop. The subject matter of this sample book was described as destroyed villages, farmsteads and subhumans in Poland. While in France, Georg's camera had captured images of ruins and ethnic types. The image of the enemy was, therefore, not only disseminated by a journalistic propaganda in daily newspapers and magazines. Pictures taken by soldiers were also widely used by camera shops and the photographic trade to promote their products. And here you have a soldier for Agfa Isopan film and the woman at home looking at such pictures, also a publicity for Agfa. War albums. War albums are a special type of photo album which frequently tell a story hermetically sealed off from family history. They usually exhibit a chronological structure telling a soldier's subjective war experiences from his own very personal perspective. Many such albums were made right away while the soldier was on leave, others years or, in isolated cases, decades later. The photos are not always pasted into albums. Various types and sizes of boxes or sleeves also serve as a receptacles for photos, negatives, slides, and occasionally cinefilms. The album serves to structure, or it could even be said to construct, the soldier's memories. The biographical story and the historical interpretation of the war within the circle of family and friends are already mirrored in the design of the pages and the selection of the photos. Here you see, as an example, also a page from an album. You see the Christmas celebration of the soldiers on the upper left, and down on the right you see partisans hanging at the gallows. So these are different ways to collect pictures. The manner in which the photos are mounted and captioned on the album pages provide insight into how the soldier saw or sees his own experiences and the course of the war. During World War II, the photo industry produced albums especially for this purpose, with covers frequently bearing the insignia of the Wehrmacht, as we saw the first. Here a second one, like swastika, oak leaves, Reich, eagle, steel helmet, and so on. And inscriptions such as "in memory of my term of service." Through flyleaves printed with photos of Hitler and Göring and the generals of the various branches of the army, the individual soldiers' photos were assigned their place within a hierarchical sequence and an ideological continuity. By way of these standardized forms, propaganda gained further influence on the visual memories of war. Photo magazines, moreover, published guides on how to make an album, also providing pointers on collecting and on storing the albums in bookcases. The guides were supplemented with explanatory notes on such matters as cardstock, captioning, format, glue, photo corners, etc., designed to support the soldier in his album production project. So you see, it's really a completely ideological subject. Albums are an interactive medium which can be repeatedly changed by the soldier himself or, long after the end of the war, by the following generations. Like the process of memory itself, image storage media also change with use. They are subject to constant transformation in the observer's perception and through his intervention. A son pasted handwritten passages from the stories his father had told him about the war beneath the respective photos. grandchildren sought their grandfather's legacy and apply scholarly standards to placing the written documents and visual relics chronologically into their historical context. A daughter interested in her father's war experiences when she saw the exhibit I did focus on strangers' photo albums of World War II, searched all visual and written documents of him as he was killed in action, and she didn't know him, and wrote a book for his and her own memory. An ancient soldier, one of my witnesses, started after the interview writing a book with his war photos for his grandchildren. As such, new family archives are generated, which find also their way out in a public space in books and exhibitions. This is also a way of comprehending family and world history as seen through the eyes of an individual and of passing that history down. The discrepancy between the transience of the photographic shot and its permanence in the album is demonstrated with particular force when blank spots turn up abruptly on pages where photos have evidently been removed, leaving their captions and traces of glue behind, along with question marks about the gaps they create in the album's narrative. This is conspicuously often the case with pictures showing or related to acts of violence. And here you have an example. There must have been a photo, you can only read the caption, executed partisans in Glasgow. Not all soldiers had cameras of their own. Many obtained photos from their comrades for money or in exchange for other photos, or bought them from professional propaganda unit photographers. Most war albums are accordingly a conglomeration of pictures from various sources. The selection and arrangement of the photos, however, always shed light on the subjective war memory, and the narrative serves as an indication of the respective soldier's mentality, how he saw the war, not how the war is. Now, second, some Wehrmacht soldiers occupying Greece. After the fight and victory of the Greek army against the Italian army in October 1940, Hitler started the invasion at April 6, 1941, and within 3 weeks the Wehrmacht conquered the country. In the beginning, the propaganda used Hitler's phrase of the unfortunate Greek people as a victim of his king, but they fight it bravely, and we can look at them with respect. So everyone was told to come, quote, as a friend of Greece. But when German parachute hunters, the Unternehmen Merkur, landed in May 20th in Crete to fight against the British army, and Cretan civilians fighted with the Greek and British army against the Wehrmacht, the German attitude changed. At once, 2 days later, the Cretan village Kandanos was demolished and 300 persons murdered. Some days later, 2 students catch the Nazi flag from the Acropolis, and the National Liberation Front, EAM, was founded in September 1941, but all of you know this. As a starting point, I'll show you some examples from albums of the research project and exhibition Focus on Strangers, which can tell us individual ways how soldiers came to Greece, how long they could stay, and their more or less subjective approach to the country, especially to Saloniki and Athens. Most of them later went to Crete, often waiting for the flight to the North African front. So first, and you have the example of the page here, one of them was Johann Magnus Wetjen, a farmer from Oldenburg, who served as a telecommunications corporal in the army and came in 1941-1942 by plane from the Ukrainian border, first to Saloniki and then to Crete. And here you have some spots of Saloniki. Then Athens from above. It's really a little bit curious photo page. As you can see, Athens only on the right side down from the plane. And some relaxing days in Crete as a stopover to the North African coast. These are quite normal snapshots with some soldiers and details on the way. The coast and harbour of Saloniki, the look from above, and jumping into the sea in Crete. The next is Johann Müller, a carpenter who served in the Air Force and came by train to Saloniki and Athens in October 41. He stayed until 43 in Athens and took some pictures of the city before he went back to Yugoslavian front. In the first picture we see a mixture of self-made and bought photos from Saloniki. A cemetery of World War I, ruins of temples and a church, soldiers at a sailing boat, and an encounter with a Greek family. The next album page shows temples and ruins in Athens, and some soldiers doing garden work. The next page gives us an impression of his everyday life in his new surroundings, at the Acropolis, at the harbor of Piraeus, eating outside on the left side, and a sort of dreaming of his wife in a park with a statue. Look at this with a little image of his wife. He must have done this montage later when he arranged this album. On the next 4 pages we see suddenly professional and well-done photos of the antiques, and at least some photos of the famous sites in Athens. Certainly Müller could buy or exchange some prints from comrades or professional photographers. The format and the border of the print give us this information. Another soldier stayed only some weeks in Athens in October 42, before leaving via Italy and Sicily to North Africa. Walter Kaul, a sales manager, starts his album with signs of his regiment. Then he gives us an impression of going by train from Crimea to Greece. With his arrival in Athens, he concentrates himself to the visit of the Acropolis, and you see here the famous panel, and the Acropolis and famous Parliament building. Takes a snapshot of the sergeant cameras before once more leaving by mountain hills. So this is Acropolis once more. Parliament building. And then, just before leaving, by mounting the hills and taking the plane to Italy and Africa. These 3 soldiers stayed only a short time in Athens. They took pictures of the city as nearly normal tourists, putting themselves with comrades in the foreground of the ruins, but didn't realize the daily situation with the inhabitants of this city. There are nearly no street scenes and people round about. These soldiers photographed in the first 2 years of the occupation, in 41 and 2. When the sanctions like punishment, actions, executions, burning of villages just started. But there is also no photo at all from the winter of starvation. In autumn 41, the German librarian Gerhard Kästner came to Thessaloniki. He was a member of the Nazi party since 1939 and started as a volunteer in the Wehrmacht with the beginning of the war. He was sergeant in the Air Force, but wanted not to fight, but had the idea to care with books about the Greek culture and antiquity for the German soldiers. He got the job from the main general and had all facilities for staying and moving in the country. In August 42, his book Greece was ready and printed in 5,000 copies for the troop. 1 year later, in 43, in 10,000 copies for the public. The commander of the Wehrmacht, OKW, was delighted about the book, because Kästner fulfilled all propaganda demands about the image of Greece for the Nazi ideology. Like, and I quote now some of his sentences, which is really not easy to hear. The Greek antiquity was built by the northern race, and so it's quite right that also now Nordic heroes conquer Hellas once more. Because southern races mixed the blood of the blonde, blue-eyed race during the last centuries. That's why Athens is now a city without measure and form. No houses, only dirty huts. Streets are only lanes. It is barbarism on holy earth. Even the villages in the countryside are ugly in the divine landscape. The people are lazy and do not work, so the German order should come. There is only one exception, the shepherds. Alone in the wilderness, they are keeping the holy fire. They have time and live in the archetypal world of archaic behavior. That is the real power of the Greek. Nothing of the south as such, but the north in the south. That exactly is Greece. End of quotation. I'm really sorry for this long citation of such Piraeus with Husum, a really ridiculous comparison, a small town at the North Sea. Olympia is as German as it could be, with a lot of homeland feelings, as Goebbels remarked when he visited Sparta. We could leave these ideas without any further attention, but this book was rewritten after the war under another title and with some corrections, named Ölberge Weinberge, some olive hills vineyards, published in 1953. Even today, it is well known and has some influence to the so-called German romantic desire for Greece. After the success of his first book, Kästner continued with the second one, dealing with Crete, where he stayed from 1943 to 1944. He wrote it under the patronage of General Breuer, the commander of Crete, who was responsible for the reign of terror during the German occupation, with work requirement, hostage-taking, paying of contributions, mass executions, burning down the village and houses, and the concentration camp Agia Niachamia. Of course, Kästner wrote about partisans as horrible persons. On his way through the White Mountains, Lefkaori, and the Omalos plain, he had to stop because of the fighting in the village of Pustoyerako in September 1943. Women and children were shot, others were brought to the concentration camp, and bombers destroyed the whole village. Kästner saw it, knew about it, but never said or wrote anything in detail about such assassinations after the war. Only in a very distant manner, like about Distamo, where he made a big detour for not meeting people. His book about Crete, ready in 1944, could not be printed at the end of the war, with the order to leave Greece in the 1st of September 1944. Kästner stayed in Rhodos and became prisoner of war of the English army in May 1945, in a camp in Egypt near Port Said, where he wrote also a book, Zeitbuch von Tumila, published in 1949. The book about Greece for the soldiers' use was of big influence, and the photos reflect its slogans and ideas, as in the album of the first Lieutenant Klaus Hese, an architect who served in the building agency of the army in Poland, Yugoslavia, and from February 1943 to September 1944 in Athens. He photographed in a quite professional way and arranged his photos carefully with captions. The size of the prints is bigger than normal for amateur prints, which is normally 6 to 9. Here they are often 13 to 18 centimeter with straight borders, which is also a sign of professional photographers. His album seems to be a real book of the Greek antiquities, as he put often only one print on a page. His photos of the Acropolis are absolutely clean without any human being. Only he himself may occur in some pictures in his office or in the Aegeis. In Aegina, sorry. There is no Greek inhabitant only by accident, 2 women and a well, nor any sign of the rigid impact of the occupation and its horrible effects of deportation of the Jews, the executions in the concentration camp Khandari near Athens, or the arrestation of the Jews of Athens and other places. Third, a captain's convolute of 4 years military service in Crete. As this soldier was also sometimes in Athens and took pictures in color, I'll show you these rare images one by one. Robert Sund, the name is anonymized. the son asked me for that. Came by train through the Balkans to Saloniki at the end of July 41. He stayed 2 months in Athens in preparation for his service in Crete as a commander of the 8th Company 733 of the Infantry Regiment 746 in the defense section of 5 kilometers in the region of Chania in West Crete, fighting against the English army. During these 4 years of his mission until the surrender in May 22nd, 45, he took 755 black-white pictures and round about 800 color slides. In his belongings of the war are also a private diary of his service in Crete and transcribed notes of a shorthand registration in his calendar of the last days of the war in Crete and the first months as prisoner of war in the English camp in Egypt near Port Said. Sund labeled all black and white photos at the backside and arranged them in 4 albums where he wrote captions for every photo. Furthermore, he made a complete list for all color slides with exact dates and sites. It is the most complete bequested visual and written documents I saw until now for the Cretan front. As Sund took not only pictures in black and white, but also during the whole time of the occupation color slides, he must have had 2 cameras, because sometimes he photographed the same scene in black and white and in color. It is quite astonishing that Sund could get until the end of the war all these color films. Normally in 41 that was finished for normal soldiers, but okay, he was a captain, so perhaps he had his possibilities. So some general notes about color photography during the war. The present-day visual conception of World War II is almost exclusively a black and white one. The absence of color symbolizes a form of distance to the abstract past, a dark epoch, little related to our colorful present. Yet Kodachrome, a triple emulsion color slide film made in the US by Kodak, and Aquacolor, produced by IG Farben in Wolfen, Germany, were available to amateur photographers in Germany from the end of 36 onward. The fixing of the colors to photo paper still presented technical difficulties for several years, however, and color films was therefore generally produced only in the form of transparency film. From 38 on the Aqua Company promoted its product at extremely low prices, so that by the first invasions in 39, Aqua Color Film had established itself firmly on the German market. Aqua was aware of the regime's interest in color slide film with its potential for serving as a propaganda instrument, as we had seen in the Signal paper, offering an entirely new aesthetic quality. For the production of private souvenir photos at the front, however, color photography was also a novelty, and snapshot-taking soldiers were extremely keen on trying out. Color slides and color cine films are accordingly to be found in the photographic holdings of a number of former members of the German military. The desired realistic effect and the direct proximity of the photographer's own visual perception were known as factors distinguishing color pictures from black and white. The soldiers did not limit themselves to certain motifs, but recorded the entire visual spectrum of their wartime surroundings, everyday life in the military, the occupied countries and their inhabitants, prisoners of war and isolated traces of combat operations. But soldiers could only buy color slide films in the first 3 years of the war. After 41, the material was reserved for propaganda photographers. Color prints were still very expensive and only used for propaganda purposes, for instance in the journal Signal, distributed in the occupied countries. So, the occupation of foreign countries at the front and behind was photographed by the soldiers, normally in black and white, on an unprecedented scale, and these images were then compiled into their own war-themed albums. And of course, color slides one could not put in an album. Some more prints, slides of Athens. This is the last one. Analyzing the convolute of Sund, I'll show both media concerning different subjects. Sund was not only employed with the fights against the English army at the military airport at Βλεμμα, but also mainly involved in the war against partisans. Since the destruction of the village Kandanos with the execution of 300 civilians at the end of May 41, the search of partisans was the main topic. Raids and search for weapons were daily duties and mentioned in the diary. From the very beginning, Sund wrote about executions of the so-called suspicious Cretans. The possession of weapons was strictly forbidden and punished with death, as the order tells, quote, "All men, women with weapons have to be executed at once. Villages where people shoot have to be destroyed. The male inhabitants have to be killed." And you see him at the right with the other officers. It's also a look around Crete. Some of the photos show situations taken from far away, but with the captions and recording in the diary, the fact is evident for February 2nd and 17th, June 5th, 4th, and 42. For May 18th, the diary notes, near Meskla, execution of 9 Cretan men. The regiment made long walks through the mountains, searching caves of partisans, and the diary tells us about exhausting and demanding night trips. During a march of several days so here you have the execution in one page of his album with 8 photos, and I bring one more detail, so you cannot see it right, you cannot put the judge before these photos, but you can see it's a hidden place and they are shooting. During a march of several days in the mountains in February 44, the troop of Sund had fights with partisans near Meskla once more and lucky. Sund shot, but he hurt by accident his own comrade, who died in the same night. Here they discovered a hole with weapons of the English and Greek. Sund got a preliminary proceeding, but it was discontinued. In contrary, some days later he got a medal for close combat. In the album we find under the date February 26, a photo series of executed men in close-up, and I dare to show you. It's hard, but it's in the album. The only ones in the whole convolute. It is obvious that this fight was one of the harshest for the partisans, and it's extremely rare that Sund photographed in such close-ups. Normally, it was absolutely taboo to take pictures of the face of corpses, even enemies. But the daily life of soldiers during the occupation had also other subjects for the album, as building a swimming pool or looking for scorpions, like here. Speaking with the neighbors, visiting a wedding, drinking raki, celebrating birthdays, his own on the left with the Pope and the family where he was living, and Hitler's famous birthday parade. The photos of Sund are quite different than those of soldiers who spent only some weeks in Greece. He photographed a lot in different situations: the inhabitants around him with whom he lived door to door, the landscape with the white mountains at the horizon, a famous subject for the camera of Sund, as well as flowers, olive, orange and lemon trees. The regiment changed 4 times the place. They started at Daratos for 3 months, then went to Agia Marina at the coast, came to Vrisses for half a year in 42, and stayed finally in Modion until 45. In Agia Marina was one of the concentration camps where all Jews of Chania were captured and put on a ship with 150 Italian at 20th of May 44. Outside of this and off the coast, the ship was scuppered. After the surrender of Italy at 8th 1943, the situation of the Wehrmacht and the Italian troops were quite tense. Sund mentioned an equal action for 2,500 Italian so-called Black West in his diary, and photos of November 44 show once more the forced evacuation of Italian troops, like here. From September 1st, 44, the Wehrmacht left Greece. Heraklion and Rethymnon were liberated in mid-October. Sund noted in his diary the loss of nearly all pages for the end of the war, so no one could read anymore. Only the little calendar gives some dates. The English army liberated Maleme and Suda at the 11th of May 45. The situation for the soldiers for the end is only told by black and white photos. And March 17th, a special ceremony happened in the courtyard. A double wedding of two soldiers with their wives in Germany, a so-called Ferntrauung, wedding far away. The helmets are lying at the table, which is covered with the NS flag. I realized, looking at these photos, that in the whole photo series, and there are more, the swastika was taken away from the print. Can you see? With a sharp object like a cutter or something like that. And that one photo, Sund cut it completely out. We don't know when and why this was done, so there is also in the pictures a sign of liquidation and disintegration. The very last photos show the Commander Colonel Barger distributing the Knight's Cross to some of the officers. It's time to surrender, and the swastika was also taken away, just up in the middle. At May 28th, Sund sold his camera and threw his pistol in a well. The last page of the album presents Sund as a prisoner of war in Port Said in Egypt, in his camp. Epilogue. In 1951, Robert Sund was accused at the District Court of Augsburg for giving order for the execution of 6 unarmed civilians in November 1944 near Khamia. He was acquitted for lack of evidence. His diary can't give any notes for this murder. The pages are missing, like the blind spot in the flag. As it is the first time that these photos and notes came out of the archive of the Institute of Social Research in Hamburg and out of the privacy of the family of Robert Sund, I want to conclude with Hannah Arendt. Each time we talk about things that can be experienced only in the privacy or intimacy, we bring them out into a sphere where they will assume a kind of reality which, their intensity notwithstanding, they never could have had before. Thank you so much.
Late, but it was such an important lecture that I said that we have to have it completely. We are heading on without any debate at the moment. So I'm very happy to introduce Georg Traska to you, an art historian and independent researcher from Austria, and he has worked on a number of subjects all over Second World War, before and after, collaborations on many other items, and at the moment he's working on the heritage of a very important Austrian photographer, Heinrich Becker. But today he's showing photographers' perspectives, the comparison between photos of German soldiers, Greek clandestine photographers, and the third-party perspective. And I may say he is inclined to do so because he knows Greek, he even speaks Greek, so he is somebody who is absolutely acquainted with the situation here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation and the possibility to speak here. Actually, I skipped the third part, so it's only a comparison between two perspectives. The third one would have been the perspective of a Swedish Red Cross member, but it actually didn't fit so well into the comparison. So my comparison focuses entirely on Athens and photos made in the German occupied city, just a few photos from Thessaloniki. I juxtapose amateur photography of Nazi soldiers in Athens from the collection of Vieronitos. You heard enough about the collection, its constitution, and also the difficulty of the collection by the impossibility of going back to the origins of the photo and and also by the fact that they were restructured many times. And I will deal with a journalist and non-professional Greek photographer, Kostas Paraskos, who worked under German occupation in Athens. His book was first published in 1973, so during the Greek dictatorship, and it contains I think around 10% of 800 photos he produced in an isolated and risky campaign. So it's quite interesting that Paraskos worked on his own, and it's not as such typical of photo production of Greeks during the war and the occupation, which was usually not in the occupied cities themselves. I will try to skip parts as Petra's presentation took a little longer, but I want to make one differentiation. It may be also helpful as categories dealing with what we heard until now. So there is what I call here a photographic discourse, in the sense of a discourse really made up by photos. In the case of Paraskos, that's quite clear, it's his book. In the case of the German soldiers, the album would be exactly such a discourse which semantically stabilizes the single photos in a narrative framework, and therefore also makes the meaning of the photos much clearer and takes away, in a way, a lot of ambiguities that are much stronger in single photos. So that's exactly also what happens in the photos from the Mythos collection, that they lost this type of integration in a specific photographic discourse, and you can only reintroduce them in a larger historical discourse. And of course this discourse also specifies the photographer's position and intentions. Yeah, I think this part of how German soldiers taking photos in the occupied regions was conditioned by propaganda, Nazi ideology. It was so well represented already that I would rather simply skip that. You see also the photos I have chosen to exemplify it were already shown by Mr. Sachse. And I will go to Kostas Paraskos, who as a professional journalist, and he calls himself hobby photographer, systematically documented the effects of occupation, of the changes in the city, in the physical city, and in the Athenians as a population who had to go through that. Part of the photos shows acts of resistance against the German population. I skipped a lot now. The order of the book, Paraskos structures his book in chapters. So the pages of photos, the photos are always isolated, but he gives a written introduction to each of these chapters. In the sequence of the book, they first deal with the occupation of the symbolically most important places, of the Greek state and of Athens, of course, the Acropolis and other places of Greek government. And then he immediately comes to the effects the occupation had on the Athenians themselves. For example, he starts with showing a photo of women wearing backpacks as a new image, backpacks until then always associated to strolling, wandering in nature, but now it became a means of collecting food from black market or from equally walking merchants. Then there is a big chapter about hunger and starvation as a particular bitter chapter with also very horrible images. There will be another talk about that. Then it's about queues, about endless lining up for food and mainly for alms, for syssitia as he calls them. One chapter about children and the particularly sad sufferance of children. A chapter about the dead, mainly starved, and the corpses that were often lying in the streets and were collected by lorries and later by clothes trucks early in the morning. About the black market and what he calls walking salesmen, that these markets, small markets that popped up everywhere in the city, and also he describes how they produced a new kind of anthropos of man, especially the black market. And together with the black market, something like outdoor cook shops appeared. He writes a chapter specifically about the winter of starvation of 1941-42, one on vandalism of drunken Germans, and like you can see here, on these kind of improvised, very simple trolleys that were used for transportation in the city. And together with that, another chapter on the reduction of public transports, of queuing up for the tramway, and then a chapter, surprisingly somehow, that the Athenians still had to go to the sea, despite the difficulties, because they simply didn't want to miss the sea. He writes and shows about the empty streets and the lack of vehicles, and then again the scarcity of cars, of fuel and of spare parts, and the type those vehicles were completely overloaded. And then there is a long chapter, especially in terms of photos, of the failure of German propaganda and the continuation of a counter-propaganda, Greek counter-propaganda throughout the war. He writes some notes about collaborating Greeks, but there are no images referring to that, and again about the predominance of resistance among the Greek people. And then there is a chapter on the celebration of March 25. So, Paraskos documents the cruelest and most shocking effects of the occupation, but he also shows more subtle changes of the city and of the population, and the flexibility with which the inhabitants reacted to their privations, and which produced somehow strange images, such as this frequency of trolleys. This is an example of those queues. There is a whole series of these long queues and lining up for food. This is one of the pictures of a man suffering extremely from hunger. This is one of those images of the dead collected on trolleys and early in the morning. And this is one picture of the long series of graffiti of the resistance. So many of these photos could only be shot by a Greek, be it for the motives being obviously critical towards the occupier, be it for the intimate knowledge of the